Well, good afternoon. It's Thursday, November 25th. The webinar that we have scheduled and arranged for today is probably one of the more exciting in the series that we've had this fall about life, business, and the economy today in the People's Republic of China. And the lineup of our moderator, Doug Horner, needs no further introduction. Lu Xu from the Republic of China is our consulate. Gordon Houlden is presenter, David Wong a presenter, and Barry Mehr a presenter. I will ask all of you to mute your mic unless you're speaking. The event should finish by about 5:30, that's Mountain Standard Time, about an hour and a half from now. We've asked the presenters each to present. We'll hold off questions until they're finished unless something really exciting begins to occur. And don't hesitate to use your chat function to make comments or raise questions. I'll be monitoring that and then posing them either through Doug or making comments directly as appropriate. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce someone known to most of us, certainly a friend of mine. Doug Horner is our moderator today. Doug, it's over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Barry, and hopefully everyone can hear me. And first of all, I think this is a wonderful idea. The timing is good. What we're talking about is probably one of the biggest markets aside from the United States that Canada has access to. And it's also one that has a very long and historic relationship with Canada between our peoples, our governments, and certainly our business connections. And so I look forward to this afternoon's commentary and presentations. This is about building the path forward, not about looking at the past so much as there's been so much that has happened. And certainly with the pandemic that all countries have had to deal with, I thought it's interesting that one of the comments that Consul General Liu, who will take over the screen in a moment, said in one of her Twitter accounts, she said that we all share a common destiny no matter where we are from. And I think that's a very true statement that we should all take to heart. And we also share a common future when it comes to Canada and China. And that future has rocky roads. That future has great paths. It has some turns and some twists. But I think as we have overcome issues in the past, we will overcome them again. Consul General Liu took over the post in Calgary in 2017. I've had the very, positive relationship and benefit to be able to meet with Consul General on numerous occasions. She is, as you will soon learn, very well educated, very intelligent, and also understands her file and her region very, very well. And with that, Consul General, I would like to pass the baton to you, and you can share screen.
Thank you, Doug, for the nice introduction. So everybody can see the PPT on the screen. So I would like to talk about life in China today. First of all, I should say that it's my great honor to be invited to speak today. Thank you, Barry, for the invitation. My special thanks go to the host of the event and everybody participating. It is you who have always been bringing about healthy ingredients into the China-Canada relations, both in good times and bad times. Some of you have long been committed to the friendly relationship between China and Canada, especially on the economic and trade front, and also to the understanding and the communication between the two peoples. Some of you may want to know where China-Canadian relations will head for. Some of you may even question whether China's huge market will remain an opportunity. What I'm going to say today is after 3 years of stagnation of the relations, it's time for China and Canada to move forward. My presentation consists of 4 questions and their answers. The questions are, is China safe or not? How can Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises invest in or trade with China? How can they get started while COVID-19 is still around? What does the Chinese market need? And what do the Chinese people crave? What does China really look like today? What does China really look like today? So let's come to the first question. Is China safe or not? Before answering this question, I would like to raise another question first. What are the most prominent China-related keywords in Canadian public opinion in 2021? I bet arbitrary detention and coercive diplomacy would be on the top of the list. In these narratives, China was portrayed as an evil land from which there is no return if you go, or worse yet, many people fell for such narratives. In our view, the question if China is safe or not sounds like we were asking somebody just finishing a big meal if he is hungry or not. Because in fact, all foreign companies and law-abiding citizens following Chinese law are very well protected. Otherwise, there won't be hundreds of thousands of successful business stories coming out. For example, the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai recently released the 2021 China Business Environment Survey report, saying that 77% of the surveyed businesses were profitable in 2020, outperforming market expectations, while about 83% expected revenue growth in 2021. About 78% of the respondents were optimistic about their businesses' prospects in China in the next 5 years. About 60% expressed plans to increase investment in China. About 64% intended to hire more staff in China. A large number of companies regard China as the primary destination for investment. If China was not safe and always conducted arbitrary detention and coercive diplomacy at will, how would these companies decided to continue their operation there with such positive feedback? Such a report was all about the year of 2020, when China-American relations were intense. Nevertheless, American companies in China still made good profits. Similarly, despite the chill in China-Canadian relations over the past 3 years, Canada Goose net sales in Asia grew 107.5% year-on-year in the fiscal year of 2019 and 2020, with the Chinese market contributing most of the share. Entering the Chinese market in early 2019, Tim Horton now runs over 150 stores in 10 cities, with a goal to hit 1,500 stores in China to compete with the Starbucks. In the Doing Business Report 2020, released in October by the World Bank, China jumped to the 21st place in the global ranking in terms of the business environment, which was 15 places higher than last year and a good news for both big and small businesses. China was among the 10 economies with the greatest business environment improvement for the second consecutive year. The significant improvement of the ranking is the vote of the confidence given to China by the world authorities. According to the statistics from China's Ministry of Commerce, about 18,497 new foreign-funded businesses were established across China from January to May 2021, an increase of about 49% year-on-year and about 12% over the same period in 2019. This means averagely more than 120 new businesses are opened per day. These numbers are the best answer to the safety question. So let's come to the second question. How can Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises invest in or trade with China? How can they get started while COVID-19 is still around? In 2020, Canadian goods exports fell by 11.8% year-on-year, while its exports to China increased by 8% year-on-year. This fully demonstrated the highly complementary nature of the Chinese and the Canadian economies and the great potential to export to China for Canadian companies. During the virtual meeting between President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping on November 15th, President Xi said that opening up is the fundamental state policy of China, and China's determination to expand its high-level opening will not change, nor will its decision to share development opportunities with the rest of the world, nor will its resolution to make economic globalization more open, inclusive, and balanced for all the benefits of all. China is to form a domestic and international dual circulation on a wider and larger scale, and to improve the market-based business environment that respects the rule of law. This will translate into a larger market and more opportunities for all countries. For companies looking to invest in China, China is attractive not only because of its optimized business environment, but also the exclusive incentives for foreign-funded businesses clearly set up by the Chinese government concerning tax, land, region, investment, fees, and services. The new foreign investment law taking effect in 2020 legally defined the rights of the foreign invested enterprises to enjoy tax and fee exemptions and more. Some may wonder how to overcome COVID-19 for economic and trade interactions with China. I have some recommendations. First, sign up for large-scale trade shows. Some annual shows are well known, for example, China International Import-Expo, China Import and Export Fair, China International Fair for Investment and Trade. These are perfect platforms for Canadian businesses to promote themselves and to find their Chinese partners. With a population of over 1.4 billion and the largest middle income group in the world, China has an immense market size and also huge potential for any product's consumption. My office is very glad to assist companies that wish to go. In case of the COVID risks, China is pleased to offer the online trade show options. For example, in recently held China International Import Expo, that is held every November, every year. A virtual trade fair was kicked off on the second day for this time, with live streaming to audiences across the country. The 4-hour event was so successful that more than 110 million viewers, mainly Chinese, were attracted. They were online at the same time, and over 120,000 cans of Afghan pine nuts, coffee beans, and cheese from Serbia were sold out just within 4 hours. So second recommendation is try e-commerce. E-commerce is a booming industry in China with 782 million online shoppers in 2020 and twice the size of the United States in terms of market scale. To my knowledge, there are 2 major Chinese online retailers allowing foreign companies to easily sell their goods to the Chinese customers without applying for a Chinese business license. There are Tmall International by Alibaba and Jingdong Worldwide by Jingdong. Cross-border e-commerce is the low-risk access to the Chinese market. Third options is look into bounded zones. China has set up bounded zones at some ports of entry where Canadian businesses are welcome to carry out trade activities and enjoy preferential policies. So let's come to the Third question, what does the Chinese market need and what do the Chinese people crave? There was a drastic change in customer demand among the Chinese population in recent years. With the rising of 400 million middle class, the demand has shifted from the low end to the middle and the high, which can be met by increasing either domestic production or imports from the international market. China will continue to provide a large and stable market for Canadian products in energy, minerals, agriculture and forestry, and science and technology. Great opportunities are available in areas where China-Canadian economies are complementary, such as information and communications, novel energy, and environmental protection, as well as high-quality agriculture products, seafood, IT products, cultural and creative products, financial services, education, and tourism. Besides, healthcare, retirement homes, leisure industries are well positioned for the next boom. The developing inland regions of China are also drawing the world's attention. Canadian companies are welcome to participate in the development and opening up of China's inland provinces. Fourth questions. What does China really look like today? In short, the Chinese people are happier than they have ever been in history, since China has historically eliminated absolute poverty. They are prouder than ever as they witnessed their country accomplish in just 70 years what the United States has done in 190 years. China also survived several recent major global crises, including COVID-19. What could make the Chinese happier and prouder than that? China's ruling party deserves all credit. 2 weeks ago, the Communist Party of China held the 6th plenary session of the 19th Century Committee. Key achievements made and historical lessons learned while the party led the Chinese people through hard work in the past 100 years since its founding were comprehensively summarized at the conference. China's successful sailing was primarily powered by the Chinese people's aspiration for a better life. The party serves as the captain, firmly holding the steering wheel in this journey. I often came across discussions on China's political system among Canadians. Unfortunately, most of these opinions were far from the reality in China. The fundamental reason for such misinterpretation was that most people rely on Western historical experience and Western social thinking to look at what happened in China. They refuse to believe that there was any other way, system, or model in the world to achieve the thriving and prosperity without colonial occupation or capital expansion. Differences and contradictions between countries are inevitable due to disparities in history, culture, and social systems. However, we believe it is entirely possible to achieve common development through dialogue and cooperation based on mutual respect and equality. The economic and trade cooperation between China and Canada over the past 50 years has fully demonstrated that the multifaceted China-Canadian collaboration based on complementary advantages and mutual benefits was a powerhouse to bring tangible welfare to both peoples. We welcome Canadian investors to set up your next venture in China. We hope that China and Canada should work together to set up the positive political momentum that facilitate the restoration of bilateral collaboration. So that's for my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Consul General, thank you very much. That was a very good presentation. Appreciate that very much. And I know it likely spurred a few questions from the audience, which we have, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentations. I know the 4 questions you posed and the answers will pose more questions at the end. I'm certain of that. Our next presenter is Gordon Houlden, and Gordon has been a diplomat. He's been in the embassy in Beijing for about 3 years, I think. Gordon, you were there, and been director of
two tours there. I had two tours in Beijing.
tours in
I
Beijing.
80s in this century. Go ahead.
And recently has been doing the director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta and a professor of political science with the University of Alberta, as well as a number of other things that, as we talked about earlier, your resume is too long for me to read, Gordon, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to toss it over to you and ask that you would go forward with your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Doug and Perry. And it's never easy to follow Consul General Liu. She's a wonderful presenter, but shall do my best. I'll start by sharing my screen. Here we are. And congratulations to Kay also group for organizing this presentation. I'm going to focus on a report which was done by the China Institute, commissioned by the Canada-China Business Council, asking the China Institute to look at what exactly is the significance of the economic relationship between Canada and China. We think we all know it. 4.8% of our exports, pretty tiny percentage, but still number 2. But what does that actually mean in terms of numbers? What does that translate in terms of effect on Canadians? Because as you may know, I'm sure you know that there's a multiplier effect. If you put a factory in a small town, it's not just the wages paid to those factory workers, but also the service industries that it generates. So you have an echo effect, which can be much larger than the original investment. And we had at the China Institute, we have access to a core within our institute and in the broader university, a core of PhD students, postdoctoral students, economists who can assist us in the drafting of this report, who assisted us in the drafting of this report in terms of the getting the macro sense of what this all meant. Now, for a start, most Canadians, now we went with 2019 stats for a couple of reasons. Number one, most of the some of the service industry reports aren't captured in the 2020 report. And secondly, while, and Madame Liu is quite correct, the goods exports increased in 2020, the service exports declined slightly, and I'll explain why that is. So that is a lot of money. And in fact, services, well, what are services? Well, there's several things that might not be front of mind for many people. One is students. Now, we're in a situation where the number of student visas issued this year in 2021 will still be very large. Students are flowing back into Canada, slowed by a couple things. One thing that will help is that Canada recently recognized as acceptable the Chinese vaccines, which were accepted already by the World Health Organization. That will mean for Chinese students easier to come into this country. Another huge service component, the one that's still missing, and that is Chinese tourists. And that won't rebound until we see the end of COVID, I'm afraid. One little aside here, when it comes to the educational exports, the University of Toronto receives more money from Chinese students paying relatively high differential wages than they do from the government of Ontario. Huge tax savings for the people of government, for the taxpayers in Ontario. More money from Chinese students than from the government of Ontario in supporting what is Canada's largest university. We estimate the total impact in Canada at 76.9 billion, let's say $80 billion. So that's over triple the amount of the actual generation by trade in both goods and exports. The total amount of jobs created, 365,000, let's say 300, I think we can safely say 365,000 jobs created by the China trade in 2019, which is, again, not something you see in the headlines. All you see is Canada's second largest trading partner, almost 5%, but it doesn't begin to capture. And calculating this number is way more complicated than you might think. Department of Global Affairs Canada did an estimate a couple of years ago, but they looked at simply the jobs created as a percentage of exports. But here's the thing, exports to China are more employment concentrated than is the case of exports to the United States. So their numbers, that is Global Affairs Canada, understated the job creation effect of the China trade and overestimated that for the United States. This is a question of, if you have a pipeline, I'm all in favor of exporting oil, but if you have a pipeline generating oil out of the ground, it's not as job intensive as is much of the China trade. And keep in mind that China trade includes services. And when you look at BC, where I'm sitting right now, or Alberta, where my university is located, that tourism business generates a tremendous number of jobs in the hospitality sector, the tourism sector, often jobs in smaller towns, often jobs to people who may not have high quality credentials, but still need work. So there's a job creation factor there, which is particularly significant in the case of China. And again, $18 billion in wages generated, looking at both the direct trade and the spin-off effect of the China trade. As well, in that 10-year run from 2011 to 2020, merchandise exports increased by 50% more than our exports to other countries at 16%. So the trend line is upward. Now, I would add, in my opinion, I think we're underachieving, despite the efforts of both governments over the years, despite the efforts of business people on both sides. I think we can do better. One of the excuses is often distance. Well, quite frankly, the sea lane shipping distance from Sydney, Australia to Shanghai is slightly longer than the distance from Shanghai to Vancouver. So I think that's a rather poor excuse. To me, the bigger problem is what I call psychological distance. The Australians, admittedly, Australia is having a complicated relationship with China right now, but their trade is booming, particularly with the price of iron ore being high. Canadians tend to psychologically identify with North America, see themselves as North Americans. They identify, because of heritage, perhaps with Europe. The idea that we are a global trading country doesn't occur to most Canadians. Asia is reachable, for heaven's sakes. It was possible to trade with Asia in the era of sailing ships. We can certainly do it now with multiple passenger connections. So it's that psychological distance that is a problem. And that, to me, is ultimately an educational issue. I'm not making a pitch for the University of Alberta or University of Calgary, where David Wong is sitting. I can see him smiling. It's rather, I think, something has to begin even earlier. People need to begin to realize how trade dependent we are. Here's three numbers. Here's the percentage of GDP generated by trade for three countries. United States, 24. China, 37. Canada, 64. 64. So in this big country, where only 37 million people rattle around in this rather empty country, we are hyper dependent on trade. That ought to be drilled into kids in every school. And of course, many Canadian businessmen know that, but perhaps not all. Of course, when Madame Liu speaks about China's dual circulation model, they are, as is large countries with large economies and large populations can do, they're attempting to increase the amount of internal circulation, build an internal market, much as the US has succeeded in doing. We don't really have that option, quite frankly, given our population size. Trade ought to be job one for any Canadian government. And I'll hit the next slide here, just a moment. Here we go. Should also note that in drawing up this, in doing this study, we had the cooperation of the Chinese embassy in Ottawa, because we also needed to get data from Chinese state enterprises. And understandably, they were comforted by the fact that we had the support of the Chinese embassy. The report wasn't done for Chinese embassy. It was done for the Canadian organization, China Business Council. But I thank the embassy for their help in allowing us to interview. And we, the China Institute, have capacity to work in Chinese language just as readily as in English. I speak Chinese, but we have native Chinese speakers who made that rather simple. Here's something where, again, I think we could do better, but it's been complicated. And that is the Chinese investment in Canada And in fact, we have the China Institute maintains the most detailed trade statistics on Chinese investment into this country. You can see them dropping. Those numbers are dropping. The total number would be in the range of about $80 billion, but the amount of investments is dropping, and there's several reasons for that. Number one, I think that China itself has put some curbs on investment abroad. Some large state enterprises, working in insurance, for example, were buying real estate. China wanted those state enterprises to stick to their core business. I understand that, and that made good sense. And China also has some concerns about capital flight, but there were other problems as well. Some of the investments turned out not to be that successful. Some in the energy business, for example, China bought at a time of high energy prices, and some of those deals did not turn out to be favorable for the Chinese side. They were, in my opinion, favorable for the shareholders of the companies that sold, mind you. So we Canadians ought not to complain about that. The third is, and this is a significant factor as well, Canadian government has become very choosy about which investments it approves. So many investments were turned down on security grounds, some fairly, perhaps some unfairly in my personal view. I think a more open attitude of federal and provincial and municipal governments even to investments that generate trade. One I was very unhappy to see disappear was a $400 million investment in Western Ontario in a glass float plant, basically making very large sheets. We import all of that. This would have allowed Canada to have a domestic production in float glass. I saw no particular problems with that, but it was not ultimately approved. It did not go forward. Here's investment by sector. You can see heavily mines and minerals. China is the #1 importer. China dominates the trade in metals and minerals, taking over 50% of the global trade in iron ore, zinc, copper, and several other minerals. That's natural. And so they are looking for to source these materials in Canada. We benefit from that. China gets diversity of source. We get diversity of destination, investment destination. So to me, that's a classic mutual benefit. And I think it refers to something Madame Liu spoke about, which is the fundamental compatibility of the two economies. What they have, we often don't, and we have, they don't have. So there can be a benefit in both directions. Entertainment and real estate, I think commercial real estate would be the biggest component of that. That's growing. #1 in BC, #2 in Ontario, flowing somewhat less to Alberta now. Energy investment is still coming in, but not on the scale that it did previously. Those big energy investments that were made in the first 2 decades of this century, we'd have to have a whole other scale if we were to capture those. And you can see health and biotech. So three things are happening. There's a diversity occurring in destination by province. There's a diversity in sector, and there's a diversity away from simply state enterprise to state enterprise and private investment coming out of China. Private doesn't mean, of course, small. It can mean very large. In fact, my standard comment is that Chinese, Canadian, large companies are mid-sized by Chinese standards, and our medium-sized ones are small by Chinese standards. That makes dealing in the China market, some of the people here, like Doug and like both Dougs that are here, Doug Horner and David Wong, both know that difference of scale is a challenge for a Canadian company, particularly if they want to take on the entire China market. If they get advice from consulates, Canadian and Chinese, from governments, Canadian and Chinese, local authorities, and from experts, they can perhaps hone in. Even for a small Chinese Canadian company with a great idea, there can still be a place, but it is not as easy given that differential of size. I'll just say a couple of words. I think, largely through my time. Madame Liu made some references to the diplomatic situation, which is for the last almost precisely 3 years been very bad by the historical standards of the relationship. I will say a couple of things though about that. #1, I'm now in my 35th year of full-time work on China. I've been through a few of these cycles. This isn't the only one. It's maybe one of the deepest, but it's not the only time that relations have suffered. And perhaps I might comment that when you're at a low ebb, perhaps the natural direction might be upward. And I think that is likely. I'm not just being hopeful there. I think, quite frankly, a couple of things that I saw during this crisis are significant. Number one is that the trade levels on the goods side continue to grow at a time, as Madame Liu noted, when our goods trade with even our principal economic part of the South suffered, the China trade did well. Also, I would say one needs to look a little bit beyond the rhetoric. Of course, there's rhetoric comes from, I'm not in government any longer, I can speak my mind freely, but there's rhetoric that comes from Beijing, there's rhetoric that comes from Washington, and there's rhetoric that comes from Ottawa. But I sometimes like to look, but what is the substance? And I'll tell you one interesting thing that happened in 2020. US investment moving to China burgeoned, both portfolio investment and foreign direct investment. Why? Because the Chinese economy was still growing, albeit at a slow pace compared to what it traditionally did, but also because Chinese supply chains are very healthy and growing. So the big American multinational corporations want to be part of those supply chains, and those supply chains radiate into Asia. They radiate towards Africa, Latin America, etc., Middle East. They're global in scale, but particularly into Asia, they're particularly strong. So those, I think, the economic reality belie some of the rhetoric. The rhetoric, of course, is serious, and we have to hope that US-China relations will do well. When that relationship does well, it tends to be a bonus for Canada as well. We're not necessarily completely tied, but we're certainly heavily influenced by the country to our south, which is our ally, but also our principal economic partner. So I wish strong relationship, and I took some comfort from the recent Xi Biden virtual bilateral. There's still tough talk out of Washington, tough talk out of Beijing, but I'm also seeing some positive signs. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, has been to Beijing for consultations, and I took one particular note of what the USTR representative, Catherine Tai, said when she was interviewed after her return in a recent speech. And during the interview, she said, she was asked, are we going to see a decoupling? She said, well, that's not the US goal. We might even see some recoupling, a word I've never heard before. So again, I don't mean to be Pollyannish, but I think we need to look for some positive signs amidst the negativity. The negativity, quite frankly, will always be there. I was a diplomat. I got quite used to that. Behind closed doors, diplomats bang on tables and usually don't shout, but they exchange strong words. But from my experience, usually at the end of that, they shake hands and they meet again in a few weeks and carry on. And I think we need to be realistic about that. One thing that does need repair, though, in my opinion, and that is the public opinion in Canada of China is at a low ebb. There's no point denying that. Madame Liu acknowledged that. And that will take time as well. But again, I've lived through several cycles, and I do believe that we're at the bottom. I hope, but I also believe we're at the bottom ebb of a cycle that we'll see a measure of rebound. I think it'll take some time to heal, but that we will see that rebound, and we need to see also some restarting of contacts, and that includes travel. I very much look forward to the loosening up of the travel restrictions are COVID-based. They make sound sense. China's done an amazing job of fighting COVID, but I think at some point, I think Chinese side would agree we need to have a reopening of that door so tourists can go in both directions, that students go in both directions. It's not going to happen now. It's not going to happen in January 2022, but let's hope that it happens before the end of 2022. I know that I have Madame Liu agreement that she would like to see that. And of course, it'll depend on the health situation. Those very talented health experts and public health experts in China will give the signal, and the Chinese government will agree at the right point. But that is something we do need, because I'm fearful that the longer it goes on, if we end up with not just 2, but 3 or 4 years of closure between our two countries, there's a loss there, particularly for young Canadians who need to get to China and see China. And we need to get those tourists and young Chinese coming to our country as well. I could go on more about the economy. I think I'll stop there, given the time limits. Thank you.
Gordon, thank you very much. Very good presentation, and you do have a wealth of knowledge from your 35 years of study for sure. And we do depend upon that knowledge on a regular basis, as I know the federal government does, as well as the provincial government and other governments too. Some good questions popped up. Bill, your question around opportunities to increase the profile of that relationship and education are good ones. And our next speaker actually is involved in that area of the relationship, and that is David Wong, who's a good friend and a partner of mine in one of my ventures, but also been working with the government of Alberta and China and Asia generally. He was the managing director of the Alberta office for China, and had offices throughout China and Hong Kong, and has been involved, I would say, in the economic development side of China-Canada relationships for, well, a lot of years, right, Dave? I won't say how many, but quite a few. And has also been living in Beijing for something in the range of 14 years, 15 years, something like that, maybe more, and brings a perspective of someone who is resident there, but currently in Canada, and has actually done the travel too. So be interested in your perspective, David, of life in China today, the opportunities tomorrow, and how we can get that relationship better.
Okay, thanks, Doug. It's actually the 14 years, 15 years was with the Canadian Embassy in Beijing, which I had the pleasure and honor of working with still a diplomatic Gordon Houlden. We had some great times then, and I'm so glad that we still continue our relationship. We refer to U of A as Da Ge, and it's nice of Gordon to give some acknowledgement to my alma mater. So in total, I've been living in Beijing. I retired from the government of Alberta and the embassy about, it'd be almost 7 years ago now. But I remained in Beijing. I've been living there 22 years now in total. I've spent in fact, more of my working life in Asia than in Canada. And my first time to China was 1986, under the tutelage of Barry Mehr, who, again, I'm fortunate to keep up that relationship. And he is really a Da Ge. He's the big brother to me anyways. The thing I'd like to kind of emphasize is living in Beijing. I remind myself, and I remind people, newcomers and people coming here from Canada, that you're coming into a different culture. It's we live in Canada. It's a multi-cultural society because we're a country of immigrants, as several people have mentioned. We're only 37 million people compared to 1.4 billion. And I think the other statistic I saw is that in China, with 1.4 billion, there's only 1 million expats there, and that's including students. So it's that part of the community that you're living in China is different. The other thing is, it's a different type of government. In China, I'm living in a communist government, and as Madam Liu said, it's and I can certainly attest to it. It's just different. It's not that one is better than the other, but you have to remind yourself that the things that we're used to here are not the same over there, and vice versa. Another example is how they're dealing with COVID. I mean, they have a zero tolerance for COVID. And it's amazing to me, the the numbers of COVID cases are in single digits. It pops up a couple times in double digits, but that's about it. When you see the numbers in Alberta and North America, it boggles my mind. But anyway, that's another issue. That kind of touches on safety. The 22 years that I've lived in Beijing, I've never had a problem with safety. Um, the and I remember when I used to have a lot of trade missions come, and I would tell people, it's you're visiting a country and cities that are mega big compared to Canada, so you have to be careful. I have to use some common sense. But generally speaking, I tell everybody you're in the safest place possible, and I do feel that way with physical safety and also health safety. Uh, I've unfortunately had a couple medical problems while living there, and they were handled just very well. I'm still around, still kicking. Um, the other thing I remind people is that you are a guest in the country, so try to um, adhere to the customs and regulations um, in while you're in Beijing, while you're in China. It's and I have to say the general attitude of the Chinese towards foreigners is really quite something. They respect the foreigner. I've again never had any problems. Even to this day, if I'd mention I'm from Canada, usually the first comment they make is a reference to Norman Bethune. The first time when I went to China in 1986, I didn't even know who Norman Bethune was. And we didn't have Wikipedia then, so when I came back, I went right to the library to find out who he was. Well, to this day, children in China are still reading about Norman Bethune. And it's an admiration, and that's passed on to Canadians, which, we're quite fortunate that way. The other thing I wanted to mention is specific to Calgary and specific to Alberta. The city of Calgary is twinned with the city of Daqing, and the province of Alberta is twinned with the province of Heilongjiang. And that this year is the 40th anniversary of that, something that Barry Mehr was part of back in 1982, and under Peter Lougheed, who signed the agreement. And I love hearing stories from Barry of that period when they made that happen. So that part is very prominent in my view, and very fortunate for Canadians and Albertans that are trying to do business there. And on that subject of the twinning with Heilongjiang, I still maintain some close contacts with the Foreign Affairs Bureau in Harbin, the capital of Heilongjiang. And I notice on the participants that John Liu, Chinese name is Liu Zhen, is from that office and responsible for North American. And I see him waving there. So thank you very much, John, for all your help and support. Whenever I travel to Heilongjiang, in my role as representing University of Calgary, John and his staff are extremely helpful in helping with the logistics and somebody asked me how many times have I gone to Harbin or to Heilongjiang, and I have to say it's well over 100 times. I love going up there, and they have a fantastic ice sculpture festival that's coming up in January. Um, the difficulty right now, because of COVID and what I just explained about the zero tolerance manner that's being handled here in China, is was very apparent to me. I just got off the plane yesterday, actually. So going through the capital airport in Beijing, it was incredible. I've never seen it so empty, and that's the international part. Most of the duty-free stores were all shut down. It I could really see the impact on tourism, and I think Gordon mentioned this in his presentation. It it must be devastating. I don't know the exact figures, but Council Liu probably has that number. But I think in the past there was something like 50 or 60 million foreign visitors come to China. It's a trickle right now. So the effect must be tremendous. Fortunately for China, they have 1.4 billion people, and a lot of those are moving up in the economy and have money. I can't remember what Madame Liu said, but my estimates is the middle class now is probably somewhere close to 400 million. So that's very substantial. So tourism in China is suffering from the lack of international travelers, but it's thriving with domestic travel, that's for sure. Every time there's a Chinese holiday, the most recent one was October 1, the national holiday. It's, they have, I think they forecasted or noted that there were over 100 million train trips alone. I don't know if you have to count plane and everything else. If you go to the domestic part of any of these airports, which I've had to travel domestically, they're thriving. The trains themselves, there's something like 15 every 15 minutes. There's a high-speed railway train going from between Beijing and Shanghai, for instance. So that part of the economy is still going quite strong. The difficulty is international. So for 2 years now, in the past, the University of Calgary would have professors come and visit our partner universities in China. We haven't had one. It's something of a job security for me. At least I'm here. I'm in China. So, but it's very, very, and it's not impossible to come to China, but it's difficult. When I go back, for instance, I'm going to be looking at close to 4 weeks of quarantine, and the flights have diminished tremendously. So I'll have to make sure that I have the right flight going back. So these are some of my comments. I'd be more than happy if people want to know more about how to the logistics of getting into China. Thank God for Zoom and Tensite and Skype and what have you. But I'm kind of old-fashioned. I still like to physically and be able to touch who I'm talking to. Doug's laughing, but we spent a lot of I really miss those times where we traveled together. He would always compliment me on my taxi driving skills in Beijing, which I'm quite proud of. Anyway, thank you very much, Doug, and thank you, Perry and Barry, for including me in this session and the future 2 sessions to come. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And we share another common thing, and that is that Barry Mayor, our next speaker, was the fellow that went with me on my first trip to China about 17, 18 years ago. I've made a number of trips since then, but Barry Mehr, who's had a long career in the service of Albertans as well as others federally and coming out of Ontario, we don't hold that against him, but he has certainly been in China a number of times, and he understands that relationship with Heilong Zhang probably better than most, and has been an adjunct professor up there and has done a number of opportunities there, and is also a partner in the group that we put together, Canada-Asia Synergy Group. And as a Minister of Agriculture, he took this young minister and showed him the ropes of China. And I would agree with a lot of the comments that I'm seeing in the chat room. It is about educating Canadians about what is happening over there, and it is about educating them about the 2,000-year history of what China really was and is today. Barry was my deputy minister. He was also deputy minister of economic development and a number of other portfolios. Barry Mehr, I'll toss it over to you now.
Thanks, Doug. And thank you, Madam Liu, and thank you, Gordon, for participating in this event. And I won't spend a lot of time, but I'm going to rely on my age to have those listening stay with me for a few minutes. Rely on my age, because in China, when you hit age 80, you get special status. So I'll do that, and in a country of immigrants, I'm an immigrant. I'm not I'm not an indigenous, and so therefore I'm going to be kind of hard on Canadians in my comments, because we deserve it. Not you deserve it, we deserve it. We're not the U.S., and somewhere along the line we got to learn that. No other country has the strength and influence of the U.S., and next to it, of course, is China. We are currently dependent as a trade-dependent country on, and you heard that earlier, on trade with the U.S., and to a much lesser degree, trade with the PRC. Thus, we have become price takers for our goods and services from U.S. buyers. Madame Liu says, and I agree, there's lots of opportunity, and when we're only sending 4.8% of our exports to China, there's something drastically wrong with what we're doing. I guess since 1980, which was my first trip, and if David's, and I know he's well over 100 visits and trips, and when I think about it, I got to be pushing 200. And the time that has been pointed out, the current time, the public opinion low ebb in Canada is actually a good time to get people to refocus, and that normally is when really meaningful relationships develop over my lifetime and career. You have mentioned Daqing, which is my favorite city in China, and one of my favorite cities in the world, actually. So with all of that, as I've said, we currently are usually price takers from the Americans. And if I were an American buyer, I would not behave any differently than they do for our goods and services. Why do we allow this situation to continue? And that's the question I asked of the Canadians on here and of myself. I said from the late 70s, I've harped on the fact that our domestic marketplace out of Western Canada doesn't go east. It runs from Shanghai and north in Asia, and of course, Western Canada and south to about Fresno in California. Now, think of it as that's the domestic market, and therefore those are the citizens of that market that we have to serve. This is, and what I'm saying is not an anti-American or pro-China. In fact, China is the only global economy that can compete as a buyer with the US for Canadian supplies of goods and services. And this is the only choice I see for us to get the returns to our economy from our high quality goods and services that are fair to Canadians. Yet we need to look in the mirror to find out who is at fault for the current circumstance. 4.8% of our exports going to China. They got probably the most robust currency in the world, and credit rating is great, safe country, and who's at fault? It's all of us Canadians when the males shave in the morning and the females put their makeup on, and who can change it? The person in the mirror, bit by bit. So with that, I would like one other, and then I'll Ling Wong, the president and CEO of Technologies North Corporation. What do you hear from those who you grew up with is the typical mood today of those living in China, as we need to become much better customers, they need to become much better customers of our goods and services, and recognizing that those that are resident Shanghai and north are part of our domestic market.
Oh, thanks, thanks, Barry, for asking a question. So just quick introduction. I'm a Chinese native. I'm actually from Shanghai. I've been living in Canada over 30 years. So I want to, so I've been on this forum for many times. I have been advocating for better relationship, better understanding. So from what I see from WeChat and the discussion I have with my classmates, relatives in China, this hasn't not really changed that much. I mean, so, there's a lot of rumors say, Chinese people are not happy and all things are go bad. But for what I see, pretty much the same. And domestically, they're doing very well, and they travel everywhere, and you can see all the WeChat postings, and still like life looks pretty much normal there. On top of that, I think in general, Chinese people have a very good impression of Canadian, see as a friendly countries, not like the U.S. They go head to head with. But in Canada, there's a couple of incidents, but they still Chinese people see Canada as a friendly nations, so they prefer to buy Canadian goods and Canadian products. So I think in Canada we should capitalize on that, not like follow our southern neighbor and be be chart hardliner. And I think we should take business there and also take the opportunity there. So that's why I have been talking to everyone in Canada. And I think that people have to realize we have a different country, different system, and you can't really use the Canadian value and so norm to judge what's happening in China. It's just not applicable. People down there are generally happy, and they are living well. So that's my feedback.
Thanks, Ling. You know, in summing up my comments, the best advice I was ever given was from an American living and working in Canada. The message was, the customer is not always right, but they are always the customer. Our next webinar on December 9 will focus on the way forward. Why our social network of programs will be impossible to maintain if we forget the advice given to me by my boss in the early 1960s in the private sector, one of the major industries in the world, one of the major companies in the world at the time. Remember, we are not the US and their Buy American policies, nor are we the Chinese, who have the world's largest population. So don't forget the quote. Remember that the customer is not always right, but they are always the customer. Also remember December 9, 4 to 5:30, and December 9.
Yep.
And let's discuss the way forward. Thanks to all of you who have participated in this. And I turn it back to my very good friend and business partner, Doug.
Well, thank you, Barry, and thank you, Ling, for the comments. I think we've got a few minutes here, Barry, for some questions from some of the folks. And I know that in the chat room, there's a lot of stuff happening relative to what the perception of doing business in China and the reality of doing business in China has been. And I think that's important. And Gordon, I saw you throw your hand up. I wanted to just throw two questions out. I'll ask you the first one, and I'm going to ask the second one to Madam New. The first one is, Gordon, we talk a lot about the fact that Canada needs to understand the relationship better, and we need to work better at it. How do we get the message that you brought forward about the job creation, the investment, the importance that China is to Canada? How do we get that message to federal, and I'm a recovering politician, so I'm asking a question of you, but how do we get that message to federal policymakers, federal decision makers, federal bureaucrats that you worked with in the past? How do we get that message to them to say, part of the problem is you are telling Canadians it's bad? How do we get them to say, you should be telling Canadians we need this market? So, and I'm going to let you go on that one, and then Madam Liu, your question is going to be about the green energy and how important that is to China and the China 2030 plan, and how is that affecting power situations that we hear about in China today? So I'll go to Gordon first on the political one. I'll come back to you on green energy. Gordon, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Doug. It's an important question. And one concern I would have in our discussion, and the chat questions have been posed, the chat comments, is that these are not the typical views of Canadian media. These are not the typical views that you find in the coffee shops and the general conversation. And that is a problem. In other words, those here today, in my opinion, were a minority who have this, are prepared to overlook the downsides and are prepared to take a very positive look. The CCBC, with this report, it's an 80-page report. It's not a thriller to read. I highly recommend. It's on our website. It's on the CCBC website. I commend it to you. It's 80 pages. If you have trouble sleeping, there's your cure. But the reality is that those stats ought to be brought to the attention of every political leader. CCBC has sent it to the Prime Minister's office, to every federal minister. I've had discussions with the federal government officials, senior officials, and I think they're not objecting to that at all. They understand that. But you saw the throne speech. You made reference to that. It wasn't one of you made a reference, one of the speakers, to the throne speech. There's a reference there to Indo-Pacific. I think the government gets that Asia, we must focus more on Asia. It's not politically desirable now to be able to focus on China, even post the ending of our consular issues on both sides. I think that, on the other hand, in my conversation, it's perfectly clear the government does not want to harm that trade with China. They want to grow it. but the political superstructure is still a problem. That diplomatic side is a problem. And I think it's not just a question of sending it to ministers. You're the politician, Doug, the leader. It'll take a lot of leadership, because right now the media is hostile, and the populace, influenced by the media, is also hostile. And there are some reasons which are legitimate for that. There are real issues. Canada has some genuine issues with China. China has some genuine issues with Canada. Let's not be Pollyannish and pretend that everything is sweetness and light. There have been real problems, and I think the Canadians have some reason to be unhappy about that. But we've got to get past that. It will take leadership in Ottawa, leadership in every provincial government, and it'll take a concerted effort to somehow counter some of the media, which sometimes says the truth. Just one more minute, if I could. I could make a movie about the United States, which would be guns, ghettos, and polarized politics. I could make a movie about the United States, which would be the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Harvard University, and Silicon Valley, and it'd all be true. And I could do the same thing with China. The problem we have right now is the only movie we see, the only media comment we see, is 100% the negative. China's 20% of the earth. They're not all saints. There's issues there. They don't have a perfected life, but we only see the negativity. We don't see the positivity. In this chat rooms here we do, but how do we change that media message? And how do we get our politicians to have enough leadership to get them to look beyond the media and to lead the public? That to me is the big challenge. Sorry, I took a bit too long.
No, appreciate the response, Gordon. And as Keith has said in the chat room, one of the best ways to do it is to get people to go over there. As Barry and David know, our group, Canada's Synergy Group, took probably 35, 40 companies over prior to COVID. And the impression that those companies had when they came back was just like the chat room that we have now. They understand what's over there. They see what's going on. They understand the opportunity, but they also understand that in many ways, China is so far ahead of us, it makes our head spin. That scares us a little bit, I'm sure. And that's where, when you start talking about energy, we have energy. China has energy. China is also one of the largest investors in green energy on the planet today. And that's why I was thinking about the question to you, Madam Liu, relative to green energy and the opportunities that there might be for Canadian companies in that green revolution that China is undertaking on the pollution side.
Thank you, Doug. You are asking the very right questions, because I think no matter what kind of energy is the right part connecting Canada, especially Western Canada and China. Well, I believe everybody understands we have a very clear blueprint towards the future of green energy. And also we had a very clear aim set up by our government that saying that we are going to achieve carbon neutral in 2060. So I think it's a vast area for both sides to have a sound cooperation, because right now in China we rely on coal pretty much, even though we are planning to reduce the reliance on coal. So with a lot of gas demand from China, I think or Canada, especially Western Canada, especially Alberta and Saskatchewan, which are within my jurisdiction, can work very well with China on supply enough gas, or we can say that the liquid gas to China to replace the coal. On the other hand, I follow up very closely the hydrogen strategy carried out by the Alberta government. I would like to have more detailed about this strategy, but unfortunately I didn't see any. I'm waiting for the detailed reports from the government, so that hydrogen is also the area that China would like to focus on. So besides the resources, I believe the technology is also the good places for us to work together. I noticed that today's participants also includes representative from Heilongjiang Foreign Affairs Office. So take the Heilongjiang province as an example. In the next 5 years, we have a 14th five-year plan. I think they really need some technology that can help them to have a better, ecosystem restoration and reconstruction. So it's in the mining areas. So I believe that the Western Canada also have such kind of ability or advantages to work with China's counterparts to have some sound results from such kind of collaboration.
Thank you, Consul General, and I agree there are a number of opportunities that we can explore, whether that's in hydrogen, whether that's in liquefied natural gas, whether that's in some of the other products that Canada is moving into in the petrochemical industry. I would also like to echo the comments that have been made relative to Heilongjiang. I've had the pleasure to be in Heilongjiang in a number of the different ministries I served. Minister of Agriculture, I was there, Minister of Advanced Ed, and as the Deputy Premier to celebrate that twinning relationship that we have. And with the 40th anniversary of the twinning relationship, I want to say thank you very much for you joining us. I guess it would be this morning for you, as opposed to this evening. And we very much appreciate a very early morning for you. And thank you for joining us today. And I think that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity in Heilongjiang and Beijing, Harbin being the twin city for Edmonton. And we look forward to some of that exchanges in the future when we can travel. Perry, I know we're getting close to our time here. And I see there's a lot of stuff going on in the chat room. Do we have questions from some of the other participants, perhaps, that might want to join in on the questions to any one of our panelists?
Thank you, Doug, Gordon, Barry, Lou. This has been superb, and I am thrilled with the opportunity ahead of us to actually post this and distribute it to our network, so that others can benefit from the various perspectives that we've shared today. They were rich, they were comprehensive, and they were realistic from beginning to end. I think we dealt with some of the realities that we're all somewhat sensitive to. But there is no question that the objective here is to build an economic relationship, one that is long lasting and not superficial, one that can weather some of the storms that we've faced in the last while. Before making any closing and concluding remarks, I will ask if there are any questions or comments that others in the network want to make. And the way to do that is raise your hand. Bill, I saw your hand go up, either it was a sneeze, and then I'll call on Alona. So go ahead, Bill, unmute if you will. Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Maybe
and be short if you would. Yep.
Question, but to Liu Zhu, with respect to hydrogen, surprising area of interest. Normally, I look at hydrogen as being an inefficient natural gas. Are you talking about fuel cell technologies like Ballard and a lot of the centers in Ontario and Quebec? Is that your main interest in the fuel cell technologies and how they're built? Or were you looking at actually the commodity?
Actually both, because we are a huge energy consuming country. So, but technology will take a very major role in the future for China and also the rest of the world to have the green energy, or even when we fight against the climate change. So it's very important. I think the technology to have hydrogen, we in China we also work on that, but probably we can share the information and also share the experience to have such kind of clean energy. About hydrogen, probably we are only on the phase of, we can call it gray hydrogen, because the highest, the best hydrogen energy will be the green one, purely from the water. Blue is from the gas, and gray is something between. I'm not an expert on that, but our aim is we will produce enough green hydrogen in the future. But it is not the only resources of the energy, because we are still working on the nuclear plants, and also the solar, and also the wind. So that will be a combination of various green energies together, but hydrogen will be something very important. By the way, hydrogen powered vehicle, electric vehicle will be the near future products coming out.
Ilona, I'm going to call on you next, but before I do, I want all of you to hold on for a minute, listen to Ilona's comments, and I'm going to come back to this point that Louis just made and Bill has inquired about hydrogen. I've got something I'd like to share with all of you. Go ahead, Ilona.
Yes, about a dozen years ago, I covered the Chinese representatives at the Globe Conference out in Vancouver, and they had laid out a detailed plan for renewable energy. And my question to all of you is, Canada was very well placed at that point. Do you think that Alberta has damaged itself because our technologies were at the vanguard, and Alberta continues to focus on, you know, the fossil fuel industry? Is it not time to move forward with our renewable technologies, which are leading the world? There are some game-changing technologies here. And let's try and, you know, convince the Alberta government to push those as well as the fossil fuel industry. Okay, and that's all I need to say.
Well, we've got a few minutes, so I'm going to pick up from there because it's a point that I think might bring all of this together. I made reference in the chat to energy being the foundation of economies today, whether it's domestic, where people want to have energy at a price that makes their domestic lives more affordable and raises the prosperity of the person and their families and their communities. Secondly, at the economic level, energy is foundational in that we need energy for our industry, we need energy for our transportation, we need energy, throughout our economy to fuel our economy. And we see the modernization of economies today being a byproduct of their capacity to access reasonably priced and accessible and affordable energy. This positions Canada in a very unique position. Historically, we've been viewed as a provider of a dirty form of energy other than hydro. But this is changing. And I think we've got a branding issue. And, Ilona, you've referred to we need more from government. Well, we're getting a lot from industry right now. And on December 2nd, we will launch a series of webinars, not unlike this one on China, on energy and the transition that is underway in Canada of our energy industry. And it will be led by a number of experts from the historical and current in the energy industry. And on December 16th, we will talk about emerging technologies that will touch on hydrogen. We'll touch on wind, we'll touch on solar, we'll touch on gray, green, and blue hydrogen. But we'll also talk about fusion and fission nuclear as a utopian force or as an ultimate force of energy, and the prospects that exist here in Canada and globally for transforming the energy from one that is GHG emission intensive to one that is indeed climate change respectful. And the wrap-up webinar on the energy series, called Decarbonization, will be on a pathway to sustainability and energy in the economy. This is very important to China. It's very important to Canada. And Canada can play a leading role, not only in policy, but in technology. And I think that's a message which is important for us to resonate because it has a bearing on everything from agriculture to lifestyle. So Doug, I want to thank you, both as a friend, as a moderator today, and as someone who is clearly connected to each of the presenters. David, thank you very much. Your background and your experience in China was extremely valuable. Gordon, you and I have to keep on talking. It's clear that the universities have been well informed about the status of China today and what we could do better and what we must do in the future. Wulu, you were extremely well prepared. You never know quite what you're going to get from a diplomat, but you were personable. I hope we've strengthened our relationship with you and with the Public Republic. So I thank all of you for hanging around. We'll have an after party for those that wish to keep the chat going. Other than that, the class is dismissed. So thank you all.
Thanks.